good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on this Dreek morning to talk about a very important topic. So today's webinar is about retirement planning with the great title of Should I Stay, Should I Go? So thank you so much for joining us this morning. Can I ask everybody to go on mute as you come into the call? That'd be fantastic. And if you've got any questions or observations along the way, if you could put them into the chat box, that'd be fantastic. We're going to move to a Q&A section at the end, so there'll be plenty of chance to ask your questions then. And I'm also recording the session, so you can listen back or share it with any of your colleagues. So this morning, I'm delighted to introduce David Keddie, who's a wealth manager with 20 years experience in financial services, and also Ian Price, who's got 40 years experience in the financial services sector. So they've got a wealth of experience, and they're going to try and condense the whole of the retirement planning section into an hour session, giving plenty of time for you to ask questions and also to reflect on the current climate and how that might impact your plans. So if it's okay, I'll hand over to you, David, now. Thank you so much.
Trish, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thanks for joining us on the call today. Ian and myself, Ian's Divisional Director at St James's Place. We want to chat about retirement, obviously how it's changed over the decades, which has been pretty significant, the implications of the changes, and then we want to focus a bit more of our time looking at defined benefit schemes or final salary schemes, as many people know them. Should I stay or should I go? It's a very topical subject, and then there'll be the opportunity for like Q&A at the end. Obviously, I hope you all enjoy the webinar. It creates some sort of thinking and new thoughts, questions for yourselves. We'll have the Q&A at the end, so hopefully we'll be able to answer some questions that you may have sort of that come during the session. So one of the key things I want to ask Ian, it really is, how do you think retirement has changed, Ian, over the last sort of few decades?
First of all, I'm delighted to be here. It's the great system about this is I can travel the country, as I just said, in the space of a press of buttons. It's absolutely delighted to be here. I think, David, it's very easy to forget just how much has changed in my working life. Very nicely, a wealth of experience. I love being introduced like that. Basically, that means that I'm old, okay? Wealth of experience means I'm old, okay? So bear that in mind. So with my wealth of experience being old at 63, I mentioned to you the other night when we had a conversation, I started work, believe it or not, 43 years ago this month for a company in Swindon called Hambro Life above the Swindon station, which is now about 1.5 miles from where I absolutely live. Reflecting back on what life was like then and what retirement was like, David, is immensely interesting. When I started work, a couple of things. Qualifications weren't quite as relevant as they are nowadays, David. I'm sure some of the people here are much, much younger than me. I had 5 CSE grade 1, so I had about not many O-levels at all, really. And they took me on, and it was interesting to watch. When I started work, it's very clear the employer was the gatekeeper to retirement. You went to work, you were told you're going to retire if it's females at 60, females at 65. I was one of the very lucky people, and I didn't realise how lucky I was. I joined the Hambro Life final salary pension scheme at age 20 on £1,800 a year. My career went reasonably well, and 26.5 years later, I left on slightly more money than that, and my pension scheme has become one of my major benefits and assets of my retirement today. But if you go back even in the 70s, also life expectancy wasn't what it is today, and attitudes definitely aren't what it was today. So we used to do a joke, you used to get to retirement, males 65, females 60, you took your tax-free cash, you bought your pension. The great news is you died in the 70s, age 70 to make way for the next generation. Slightly changed, David, now.
Yeah, it has indeed, hasn't it, really? I think that there was more definiteness about kind of retirement then, and really people knew what to expect. But I think that's obviously changed, I think, and really over the last, I suppose, 2 or 3 decades, there's been some significant changes. Do you want to just explore those a bit more?
Right. First and foremost, if you come to today's world, 2020, and I think this is, as somebody who's getting closer to retirement by the minute, I think it's something that employers have got to get their heads around is they cannot make an employee retire anymore, because the choice about retirement sits with the employee. I wear many hats, David. I'm very lucky enough to work at St James's Place. I also run some charities. So I've been a chairman of quite a few charities. And it's one of the biggest issues we've got in the non-profit world is as people get a little bit older, how do you manage them in that later stage of their career? I think it's going to be a big issue. I reckon in the next 5 years, I think it's going to become one of the bigger issues that businesses have got to face is that they cannot make an employee retire. I think that's going to be really interesting, and the responsibility sits with the individual. I think then you couple that with, if you go back into the 70s, and my parents are the best example to use, I happen to live in Swindon. Believe it or not, my dad moved nationwide to Swindon in the 70s. My father worked really hard. He retired through ill health at 58, and unfortunately he died of a massive heart attack at 65, which was 29 years ago. Last week, I popped down to see my lovely mum, who's 96 and a half. I've now worked out, you know, if you've got grandchildren, they always say I'm 2.5. If you've got older people, they now add on the half. So my mum told me she's now 96 and a half. I popped down to see her. Nationwide in Swindon hate my mum. The reason is she's outlived every bloody actuarial assumption in the world. And, you know, she still lives, but believe it, I'm very lucky, she lives by herself and everything. So what you've got, David, is a real quantum shift. The responsibility sits with the individuals. I'm conscious we've got directors here who run businesses. The influence they've got to have is actually quite difficult because you might want people to leave, but you can't make them leave because, well, you can make them leave. It's called a check, if I'm really honest, but that's a whole different story. But the reality is, so that shift has been significant. And I think the other shift I've seen is, if you go back to my mum and dad's generation, and I'm not being sexist, it's just what happened. My mum didn't work. She brought up 3 children. So the income in retirement was dependent upon one person. That's completely different today. More often than not, there's couples and the partners and whatever. I have to be so politically correct, it's being radioed. I have to be so politically correct, partners. So you've got more than one income coming in retirement. Yeah. I also think attitudes have changed that really impact that, David. So I was thinking back about my dad, unfortunately, like I said, died at 65. I'm 63. They looked old and acted old. Does that make sense? I don't think you can remember your parents at that age, but they became really old. Yes. Now, if you look at people, you know, we joke about it, David. I know you like playing tennis. You're not as old as me and all that sort of stuff. You know, I bought a Peloton bike because I'm desperately trying not to have a heart attack at 65 like my dad. Yeah. I nearly had a heart attack this morning getting on the thing, let alone pedaling it. But so the situation is, I think attitudes. So we, as an older generation, we keep ourselves far fitter than the previous generation. So I think it's both financial attitudes have changed and personal attitudes have changed.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like we're having a midlife crisis later, Ian, does it?
Yeah, I've been having a crisis ever since I started work. That's a whole different story.
But I think, what you're saying is there's just, obviously retirement's taken on a different kind of view at this moment in time, hasn't it?
So can I even go back to say first? Sorry to interrupt you, David. I'm not sure retirement's the actual right word either. Because retirement to my dad was the end. Does that make sense? Retirement was just like, bang, it's the end. I think now more and more people are thinking about retirement. You've heard of the third way and all this. It's, you know, there's more people in retirement partying than I've ever seen before. You know, and I'm going to use an example, David, whereby when I started working in the pensions industry, we got people to retirement, and they just took her income until they died. I don't mean to be rude. It helps, you know, that was what it was. Nowadays, I think the stages of which you go through are different. Therefore, how you plan those stages are different. Great example, David, which will hopefully make you smile, because it's my intention today is to make you smile. I think there's like 3 stages of retirement. You get the go-go years, you get the go-slow years, and you get the no-go years. So you bear this in mind, and I'm sure you're all now going to conjure up, as I explain this, I bet in your mind you're starting to think about people. The go-go years, we reckon, is between 55 and 75. 75 to 85 is go slow, and the no-go years is 85 plus. I recently did this presentation and met the most delightful character who was 87, who told me he was definitely still in the go-go years, all right? So it depends upon health. So what that means is, if you look at my generation, I'm sure someone online is similar to me, the baby boomers. Baby boomers rock. I did an article called Baby Boomers Rock, because I think we do. I absolutely think we have a great time. But I think the baby boomers, the 55 to 70, when they want to have fun. I'm lucky enough to have 2 ace daughters. My daughters have travelled more of the world than I have. So when I stop work, I'm going to have a party. I am going to spend the kids' inheritance. We are going to go travelling. So that's the go-go years. You're going to spend more money because you're healthy, you want to see the world, and you really want to hack your children off, which I find quite enjoyable now as I get older. You know, I'm really quite enjoying that. So I want to do that, David. You then get to the go-slow years where actually your age and your health slows you down a bit. So I think you start spending less money. And then you get to my mum's generation, which is 85 plus. You know, the biggest conversation we had 3 years ago was persuading my mum to stop driving. It was the biggest conversation and family crisis we had. So we had to get her to stop driving. We've just got the same problem coming up with Nicole's dad. So I think even the shape of how you take your income retirement has changed.
Yes, I think absolutely true, and I think everything is so much flexibility and choice these days, isn't it? And that's the point, I think, where you need to have, I suppose, help and advice in terms of looking at that, because it's very, very complex. So the choices have become more complex, haven't they?
Definitely. And I think also, if you couple to that, I think people now look at retirement in a different way. So the conversation I had this weekend with my lovely wife was, at some point, we will sell the house I'm in. It's far too big for the two of us. My mum still lives in a rambling a bungalow by herself in Bournemouth. She should have downsized years ago. So I think downsizing your property will become more relevant for my generation than ever before. I was driving into Cirencester yesterday to our head office, and literally on the outskirts, they've started to build a retirement village for the over 60s. Worse is that they have mail shotted me, which did slightly cheese me off, but never mind. But they mail shotted me. I can see that as quite a significant change over the next 5 to 10 years, whereby it won't be, you know, I can remember when my grandparents went into an old people's home. They used to call it old people's home. It had that connotation. It was rubbish. So to me, what you're starting to see is markets are starting to adapt to the trends that we've got. So in Cirencester, literally opposite the main St James's Place building, is a McCarthy Stone development. It's beautiful. It really is. But it's right in the middle of Cirencester. The people who live there can walk. They're about literally a 3-minute walk from Waitrose and all that sort of stuff. So I think there's going to be a real quantum shift in how we move into retirement. And one of those is about, David, you know me quite well. I'm lucky enough to be married to Nicole, who's 7 years younger than me. You know, the conversation we have, and I know it sounds very rude, in retirement, at one point, one of us is going to be left by ourselves. Nicole has really reassured me it is going to be her. She's clearly defined that. So it's going to be her. We've sorted that out. So in some ways, I want to get to where she's going to be by herself. Does that make sense in my head? Because, you know, we've got, you know, we're very lucky to have a nice house. But no, to change the light bulbs, it's quite high ceilings. You've got to get on a ladder. Well, that's not going to happen in a few years' time. So I think that bit about how you're going to live your retirement is equally as important about how you're going to fund your retirement. But I think downsizing, or even things like equity release, will become far more apparent for our generation going forward, because we're all wrapped up in property, yet property's where all our money's tied up and you can't do much with it, if I'm really honest. So I think that's what's really changed, David.
Yeah, I think it's more sort of thinking about it practically, isn't it, in terms of what's going to be used in retirement and how that's going to be used. And I suppose we've seen so many trends, haven't we, over the last few years, in terms of really with people retiring part-time, not retiring full-time, just going consultancy. So many different sort of different options.
Right. So if you go back to my dad's generation, they had what was called a cliff edge retirement. They stopped on a Friday. They got retired, they got their gold watch or Claridge clock, and they never worked again. I'm going to say, it's quite well known, because I keep telling my daughters this, I'm the martyr generation. I've worked since I'm 14. I started working Ray Hitchcock Sports in Solihull as a Saturday boy, aged 14, and I've worked all my way through. I'm planning to make sure that when I stop working for St James's Place, I actually keep working as a consultant, maybe 2 days a week, because I still need, I need to almost untrain myself to work. Does that make sense? It's a bit like, I know you're a top athlete, David, a top athlite. So if you're a top athlete...
Very kind of you.
I'm using my imagination here, okay?
That's good, very vivid, very vivid.
So it's a bit like a top athlete. What they can't do is be a top athlete and then stop training one day. So it's almost like we've got to get used to it. So I call it like a glide path into retirement, which may take from 10 years. And the other side, I'm sure we've all met people. And in fact, there's a new term coming out called the unretired. These are people who retire 6 months later, they're so bored, they won't go back to work because they plan financially, but they haven't planned what to do. I actually think COVID, I'll be very careful. Very personally for me, COVID has actually been really good for me because usually, as David knows, I do all my presentations live, face to face in Scotland or Manchester. So I've got used to not travelling, and also we've got used to doing these type of events. So I think you're going to see more people absolutely phasing themselves into retirement. And it's almost like the second careers. More people in the 60s are now setting up businesses than ever before. I think that trend's going to continue. Absolutely, it's going to continue. The thing I'm worried about most, David, in retirement is what happened to my dad. You know, so he stopped work. It was not good for him stopping work mentally and physically. It really wasn't. Hence the reason I spend a lot of time making sure I'm going to do something. So I think this unretired is going to be a problem. But that counterbalances the issue we've got as a society is, because we're living longer, the responsibility we're passing on to the next generation or the back to the next generation is huge. So, if the state pension is not funded, therefore our children are going to be paying for our state pension. I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. And fairly recently, there's been some fascinating trends in a lot of countries. They reckon that there is not what's called the replacement birth rate. And in the UK, I saw a figure the other day that 50% of families only have one child now. And that's not replacement level. They reckon some countries' population will start to go back. And Japan was one of them. And did you notice China changed their one-child policy because they started to realise they needed more kids coming through to actually support the elderly. It's called the 4-2-1 generation. One child supports two parents supporting four grandparents. Fascinating to watch. And
it will. I think that's going to continue. I think that obviously we've seen population birth rates, if like, dropping in Western countries. So that's obviously going to have impacts in terms of the state pension and how affordable that is, and whether the government decides to sort of spin it out longer into the long grass in terms of when people can start to take their state pension. So there's always that responsibility, isn't there, to obviously look after yourself, or more of that being deferred from the state to ourselves, isn't there, really?
Yeah, I think this would be a lovely one. We all had a glass of wine to sit there and say, right, what's the consequences of all the support that's been given via COVID is, no matter which way you look, there's a lot of debt being built up. And at some point, that has to be repaid. What's the easiest way to do it? And it is meant to watch. You're quite right, David. State pension worked when life expectancy wasn't as good as it is. State pension now, I'm lucky enough, one session I do is to retiring policemen, age 55. They're retiring on full benefits at age 55. They could live 30 or 40 years. That's huge. So I think there's going to be some real difficult decisions that will need to be made over the next 2 or 3 years when hopefully the environment we're in with COVID sorts itself out and become a norm. I was just mentioning on our local television yesterday, Zurich, who's quite a major employer in Swindon, has already said they will not be going back to everybody in the office 5 days a week, no matter what happens. They're called hybrid workers. So you will see a lot more employees working either 2 days in the office or 3 and flip and flop. And I just think businesses have got used to that. I don't want to take it down a channel. I'm very conscious, though, there are some people who find it very difficult working from home, and I'm not trying to override that. I think there's some people who definitely need to be in offices because they haven't got the space at home, children, whatever. But we're at the cusp of a completely different way in which people are going to work, David, going forward. Yes. And business is going to interact with that. Mm-hmm. And I think that we mustn't understand ultimately means people's changing attitudes on retirement. So one of the things, David, you know me quite well, one of the things I've decided is because of COVID, I am not ready to retire. I've experienced it. If I wasn't working, what am I going to do? My wife goes off to work as a school teacher. She can't possibly get up quietly, so I'm up and dressed by 6:45 in the morning. So what am I going to do until she comes home when I cook the tea? Because that's my job as well. So I'm conscious that I need to do so. I think people are doing that. The other side of that, because I'd like to do both sides, David. Yeah. I've met some business people I know who are running businesses, and they've said, I now just want out. I cannot, my brother runs a big estate agency down in Bournemouth. I spoke to him in January. He's having one of his best ever years. 2 months later, he had 100 staff on COVID. It was really scary. Okay, they come back out of it. So I think out of this will be some really interesting trends vis-a-vis employees, how they work and retirement, and how you phase yourself into retirement. And we've just got to accept those trends are different.
Mm-hmm. So you think a lot of people will be reevaluating their kind of thinking about retirement during this time, Ian? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Mm-hmm. And I think that's to do with, you know, I was talking to, fun enough, it sounds really weird for some reason, I was speaking to my bank manager today for some other reasons, and we're just saying, I'm very conscious of everybody lives all over the place. Down in Swindon at the minute, we personally believe the housing market is just, I don't understand it. Why it's going so quickly, we don't know. I think people are moving because they're bored with their houses and want to do something. I think there are people who've now got, you know what, I've got enough. And I think this is about what you want to be in retirement. And I think that's really important. If I go back a stage, that might help.
Yes.
As you know, very similar to you, I've got two lovely daughters. One's 28 and one's 32. 4 years ago, the 28-year-old came to me, who was 24 at the time, obviously, and said, Dad, I've been to university. I now live at home. I've decided it's time. I stood on my own 2 feet and I bought an apartment, which was just like music to my ears. You're going to move out? Absolutely fantastic. Then you have the conversation, how? Oh, right. Well, what? Do you know you need a deposit? Oh, do I? Yes. So I'm a very sort of generous kind of person, done a bit okay. So I did a great deal. I like to do deals. So I said to her, if you save £1, I'll save £1 with you up to 15 grand. So if you save 15 grand, Mum and I, Nicole and I, will also match 15 grand, which I thought was a very good deal. Now, I'm going to talk Swindon prices, okay? Please, I'm very conscious of all over the place. If I do this in London, they usually say you can't buy a garage for that, but I don't really care. I'm not in London. So literally 3.5 years ago, Jessica bought a lovely 2-bedroom apartment, 10-minute walk from us, 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom for £147,000. We put down £30,000 deposit, of which I put in £28,000, okay? The deal completely went out the window. It was rubbish. I don't know why I even thought it was going to work. But why did we do it? I'm sure some people here are getting this. Jessica's apartment is beautiful. Her mortgage repayments are £410 a month. To rent that was £850 a month. So what we're seeing is generations are helping out the next generation far earlier. And I do this as a smile on my face because I love my mum dearly. Can we put that up? If it's recorded, she might ever hear it. I love my mum dearly, really do. But she only wants to give me, my brother and my sister money when she's dead. It's an awful expression. And she said to me the other week when I saw it, it's all right. When something happens to me, you'll be okay. I was getting to the stage where I was saying, Mum, you are 96 and a half. Can you hurry up, please? You know, just help the family, help. But so what she wants to do, it's terribly rude, isn't it? What she wants to do is leave money at the end. Does that make sense? She won't give until she's dead. That's an awful expression. And the best way I can explain it, so my parents' generation, or my mum's generation particularly, want to give with a cold hand. I like giving with what's called a warm hand, so I can actually see the benefit of the kids. And I'm sure on the call today, lots of people are helping out children in many different guises. You know, I've helped out with the helping her purchase the property. My sister-in-law is helping out immensely. She's babysitting her granddaughter 3 days a week to help out to save childcare. So I think this help of the generations of the baby boomers, who are the retirees, has a massive impact both up the chain to the older generation and down the chain. But like I said, my mum is absolutely hilarious. And also, I call them the martyr generation. They'd rather not spend money and be bloody miserable as well. You know, why do you want to get a taxi? I don't want to spend 10 quid. Well, be bloody miserable, Mum. Just spend 10 quid, you know. But they can't get their heads around that, David.
No,
Whereas I think our generation are quite good. You know, somewhere on my desk, you know, I've got my mobile phone, I can click. We're lucky. So I think that's what's changing so much. And I think businesses have got to adapt to this. You know, so if you think about how business is adapting, the biggest one, we've got a cruise business in Swindon. They market to my generation, the baby boomers. When it goes back on, what you see in the papers, once the cruises start, your Sunday paper will be inundated with cruise offers because they want our generation to go off cruising. So I think real change, David, there. And I think I'm saying that the retirement becomes a point in time where you just decide which way you're going to help, up the chain or down the chain.
It is. I think, yeah, generations obviously need that help with the house prices as they are, Ian, don't they? And I think obviously that's when you can, you've got to be able to do that. So, I mean, looking at sort of retirement changes ahead, obviously one of the key issues is about 650,000 people retire every year. COVID has accelerated some people's decisions about retirement, and for others, they've delayed it, but some people are in different positions. But one of the crucial things when we're looking at the sort of defined benefit final salary market, if you like, in terms of schemes in that way, what's your sort of view on that in terms of, because obviously that's quite a topical subject at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, right. I'm very conscious. What I don't want to do is get into jargon, because jargon, it's not good. Right. Let's take a step back. At the end of the day, anybody's role is to try and have enough money to live off in retirement when they've got no income coming in, either their income has stopped. What we try and do, or what I try and talk to everybody about, is work out how much income you're going to need in retirement is the $64 million question, because you panic and whatever. But reality is, there comes a point whereby you need a certain amount of income to cover your fixed costs and a bit extra. That is what it's about. And sometimes I don't think it's as great as you think it is. I think sometimes you can read articles and they scare you. So what our job is to say, right, what do you actually need? And by the way, whatever income you want in retirement, I'll agree. I've met people who want this, whatever. As I mentioned, I joined Amber Life. I was then what was called enrolled into a final salary scheme or defined benefit scheme that was breathtaking. Non-contributory, 1/60th, contracted in. When I got made redundant from Zurich, they said, by the way, you can have your pension at 55 without a penalty. So I'm actually a pensioner as well. My pension from Zurich actually funded my daughters through university, so they came out without a debt. So I'm one of the very lucky ones. What we're seeing in the market today is really interesting. First and foremost, this is only for people who work for a private company, not a public sector. And what's actually happening is some businesses are trying to offload that liability by offering a transfer for the individual to take that money away from the company. When I looked at age 55, it wasn't worth me doing it. I now know what the transfer values are from Zurich, it probably would be. So David, what you've got is any asset is a good asset to have, I believe, in retirement. What you've got to work out is if you have a final salary scheme or defined benefit scheme, should you move it will be dependent on so many different circumstances. The starting point would always be leave it where it is. And the example I used was like I said, my good old mother. She still gets, every month she's got a pension being paid, and I use her a lot in my presentations. She doesn't know it, but I do. A good ammunition. I'm sure some of you remember this. It was 32 years ago. 32 years ago, interest rates went to 15%. 15%. I've never thought in my wildest dream, ever when I was working, that interest rates would be 0.1%. So in my mum's retired life, she's seen interest rates as high as 15%, as low as 0.1. And this was one of my best lines. My dad was regional director nationwide, so my mum likes her money, guess where? In the Building Society. And he'd sort of go, oh, whatever, mum, just do whatever you like. She said to me the other day, so Ian, you work in financial services, well done, 43 years, first time you've asked me, but here we go. When will interest rates go back up? My response, not in your lifetime, was not one of my better lines, if I'm really honest. But honestly, she's sitting there, and you know now, trying to get any money on deposit is very difficult. So whenever you look at any asset you've got, what you've really got is, if you've got a defined benefit scheme, David, you've got an asset. What they're trying to do is offer you money to buy out. And I'm sure because of it's the industry directors, and a lot of these guys will be aware of this, we've seen a lot of businesses get into real problems because they've had it run a final salary scheme, and the assets have actually started, or the liabilities have increased dramatically. I'm sure a couple of years ago, you remember Philip Green, was it, put in £364 million to keep his knighthood. Oh, sorry, to make sure the pension scheme actually ran for his staff. That was allegedly, I'm saying, that's been recorded. I just realised that. Thanks, David. I forgot that little red button's been recorded. But so what you've got is, you've got a situation whereby these schemes, as a liability to the companies, nobody wants them. Because actually, it's an open-ended. All the guys on here are directors. The one thing they hate is open-ended liability. Why does? Because that means you can't actually value it. But so we're seeing some companies offering what would be quite interesting transfer values or cash equivalent transfer value for that member to decide if to move. The starting point, I'd say, on 99% of people is actually stay where you are, David. There's a few around the edges whereby it might be worth it. I'm very clear on that. Stay where you are. It's the ultimate guarantee. It's a bit like me.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Zurich. I'm sure Zurich are going to hate me. It's, touch wood. If I take after me mother and I live until I'm 96, Nicole's 7 years younger. Assuming she lives to the same age, and I started taking my benefits at 55, they could retain that benefit for 40 years. That's a huge liability. Yeah. So there is a bit of peace of mind to me, but this all comes back to, and it's the hardest thing to do because I'm conscious that business is harder at the minute than ever before because of what's going on in the world. Sitting down and working out what do I want when I retire is really hard to do. Even I find it quite difficult to do. It's a bit like the decorators. Sometimes you go to the decorator's house, they're the worst painted houses. Come to a financial, I've got lists of things to do that keep getting moved around. So actually taking time out to say, right, what I've got, if I've got a business, I sell that business, how much does that help towards my retirement fund is really important, David. But you're quite right. On the final salary thing, that's why I sometimes call it, should I stay or should I go? That came about because I was listening to The Clash that some of you remember or may not remember, had a great song called Should I Stay or Should I Go, which quite cheered me up, if I'm honest. So I think with that one, what you've got is an interesting dynamic at the minute. And I think we've started to see a real quantum shift in businesses over the last 6 to 7 months vis-a-vis the number of businesses now not paying dividends. Or will they start paying dividends? If they start paying dividends, at what level of dividends? I've seen reports coming out. How can you possibly pay a dividend if your final salary scheme is in deficit? You probably saw some notes on furlough, and what the government is saying is they're on the bigger businesses, they're saying, actually, if you're doing this, you cannot be paying this. So really quite an interesting time, David. And I think my personal opinion is businesses always survive, so they always do. And there'll be new businesses coming in. I think I mentioned to you the other day, sitting here doing some work for one presentation where Apple, is it now worth $2.3 trillion? I can't get my head around a figure of 2.3 trillion. Then I found out they're worth more than all the FTSE companies added together. Shows you the impact of some of these organizations around the world. But other businesses will survive. And it's interesting to watch, even locally, how businesses have reacted this year and who are the winners, and unfortunately, sometimes who are the losers. And I think that's what we've got to keep. But I think from a retirement point of view, David, we're seeing some of the bigger businesses now saying, look, we've got this liability. This is like a millstone around our neck. Can we get rid of that liability to the individual member by basically offering them an amount of cash that's worth transferring? But I go back to it, it's an asset. What you've got to work out is the money you've been offered to take on that responsibility, which you would be, worth considering. And that's why we've got to be really careful on that one.
Yeah, I think it's obviously, I think you and I know, Ian, that the regulator's starting position, the Financial Conduct Authority is saying that, if you've got a defined benefit final salary scheme, leave it there. That's the kind of starting point for the regulator. But obviously there are some circumstances that, some individuals might think, well, this is something I need to look at a bit more closely. What do you think the sort of factors that, individuals should consider in terms of when they're looking at that position for themselves?
At a very high level, I'd say some of that's to do around, it's all about personal circumstances. It's about attitude to risk. It's about inheritance tax planning, flexibility, believe it, we've got some people who are very worried about their employer. Some of these bigger businesses, if they've got their pension benefits tied up with that employer and that employer goes under, for the sake of argument, okay, they've got the pension protective fund. So some real issues around the employer. What I don't want to do is ever say, just because of this, you should do that. Like you said, we have a very robust process to look at, but we are seeing, fun enough, there's some industries that seem to be doing quite well on offering it. Financial services businesses will even offering quite good values. And I'm very conscious up in Scotland, there's a lot of financial services business around, so they're offering it. But I think to me, it's all about, again, the individual. I go back to that all the time. Too much of our time is spent about grandiose words and figures, David. To me, looking at me mum on one side of the street, and she's okay. Looking at Chris on the other side of the street, her mate, the only way she survives is actually by doing equity release. Who's to say what's right and what's wrong? It's got to be right for that individual. And I think one of the things you're going to start to see, and you'll start to see it more than ever before, is this intergenerational battle that's going on is fascinating. There's been a report that the generation coming through are going to be the first time going to be less wealthy than the previous generation. So you're starting to see that, our generation or my generation was fixated by owning a house. You're now going to see a whole generation, actually, I think, become generation rent. They would actually rent. There's a recent article, a programme I saw in Manchester, believe it or not, the other day, whereby Legal & General are now becoming a major landlord in the rental market, but upmarket rental properties. So I think we've got this quantum shift going on at the minute, David. I'm not sure quite yet where this year's put us into that place, but like everybody, I'm sure all of us, I'd just like it to be back to a degree of normal, but it will never be back to where it was. I never thought in my wildest dreams I'd be able to sit and run do my job from an office in my house in Swindon all over the country, or in fact even over the world. I've done a presentation we've got in Singapore for somebody. So I think it's changed. It's also reduced, my time traveling. It's reduced costs to the business, and probably I'm more effective than I've ever been, David. So I think there's some real trends we're going to see. But there's a downside to that as well. I'm very conscious, a mate of mine phoned me from Canary Wharf yesterday, and he was saying it's like a ghost town there. And only 10% of people back in. So some really interesting trends. And you're going to start to see, and I've already started to see in Swindon and the West Country, a couple of estate agents are starting to see people are now prepared to move further afield from the city because they're not going to go in so much. So I think you're going to see some movement out of cities with families. So I can't use the word I want to use, but these are the guys who work Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursdays. So they're going to be Monday and Fridays working from home. All this has got to come into the mix, David, about businesses, support and what they're doing. We've got near us, we've got some lakes, and they've built second homes on these lakes. I've been told in lockdown, they've never been so busy because everybody's moved back to them. So interesting trends, David.
It is. I think we see that in terms of property, our property portfolio, and looking the way that's managed. 15% of people are obviously, they think 15% or more of people will continue to work from home. Obviously, offices will be repositioned into something else. I think they're looking for more space, more breakout space when they have that. When things come back to, I suppose, a more normal position. But certainly, there's going to be huge drivers for change through this because of COVID, and there will be societal changes. I think that's there's no doubt about it. And retirement is just one key aspect of that, I think.
Oh, absolutely right. And at the end of the day is you need businesses to thrive. I'm a massive fan of that. In Swindon, we've just seen Morrison shut in Swindon, Sainsbury's shut in Swindon, House of Fraser were going to shut, just got a rent deal, so it's now back open. Debenhams is shut. You come to Swindon town centre, it's really not good. Yet we've got an outlet village in Swindon, which is in the old railway workings, doing really well. So it moves. Businesses move and adapt. So I think we're at a stage where we're going to see a lot more businesses coming in. I always argued when we were in the real lockdown, I never knew how often an Amazon van could possibly get up our drive, but it seemed to be there very regularly. My wife seemed to be clicking everything. I can't believe it. But it's changing. So you suddenly think, if in any town or city we live in, how many people are employed now driving vans to deliver our parcels is absolutely amazing. So it's just changing, David. And businesses do adapt. You took a snapshot of the high street when I started at Hamburg Life 43 years ago. There wasn't a coffee shop in sight. When I had I don't know, some of you too young to remember this. You used to have what do you want your coffee, black or white? Not latte, skinny latte with a fat white, blah, blah, blah. And we all pay ridiculous amounts of money for hot milk warmed up, don't we? I have to say that. I'm very clear about this. Hot milk warmed up. I have got an espresso, which I think is one of the cleverest marketing machines ever in the world. But that's what we used to do. I'm real sorry. I go off my hobby horse. I shouldn't, but never mind.
No, we can see there's so many different trends, and we see that obviously it's just innovation is just moving things forward, isn't it? And I suppose what we've seen, in the financial markets is COVID has kind of accelerated that change for a lot of us. I mean, you're on Zoom now, and it's the over 65 who've been the biggest adopters of Zoom during this period because they want to keep in touch with their grandchildren and children.
Absolutely. If you go back, if this unfortunate occurrence had happened 10, 15 years ago, I don't think we could have survived it because we didn't have this sort of we had Skype. We didn't have as sophisticated as this. Absolutely right. I have been absolutely amazed how many of our clients, excuse me, who are much better at Teams and Zooms than mine, because literally you're right reason, David, they've got family that they haven't been able to see, therefore they're going to do it. And that's why you're starting to see some very clever marketing, I think, around Teams, Zooms, and all that. So really fascinating world we live in. And I think in some ways quite exciting, because there will be new trends, David. There will be new opportunities. You know, I've made a decision for very many reasons. I'm not going to buy another white shirt, because I've actually put them all out. I've got enough white shirts until I die, because I bought so many over the years. I'm not wearing a white shirt anymore, because we don't wear white shirts anymore. We wear blue shirts, and we don't wear a tie anymore, because we don't. It's that type of thing. It's getting ridiculous, isn't it? And like I said, sitting here with a pair of shorts on just to be until tomorrow, it's unbelievable. So I think you're right. You're going to see businesses adapt. That means that retirement will adapt. I've met somebody recently whereby they are working really hard. They've got a nice house. They're not going to move, and they're going to work really hard. So by the time they're 50, they've got the opportunity not to work. Different interests. So people have different approaches. I spoke to somebody yesterday who wants to see me. He said, I'm 75, I'm not giving up work, so I really enjoy it. So it's total extremes about what's going on, but that makes it fun. Does it make sense, David? That makes sense.
It does, and I think that's where it's important that in terms of retirement, you get the right choices, because we're all different, and so for some people it might be, you know, the security of, let's say, defined benefit plan or salary is exactly the right thing for them, you know. But for others it might be they feel, oh, actually the flexibility to draw, you know, a variable income, tax planning, etc. for the family, depending on what else they've got, might be an appropriate sort of route to go down. But it's a very difficult decision, isn't it? I think
the one thing I shouldn't underestimate, this is all predicated by good health. You know, good health makes a huge difference. I suddenly, for some unknown reason, I listen to the radio far more now, because actually, I don't know about you guys, but sometimes when you've been on Teams or Zoom all day, the last thing you want to do is watch television. So I've been listening to the radio far more. And the other day they were replaying they were replaying Tom Jones. He's blimmin' 80. He's out and about, but he's still partying hard, isn't he? Good God, but he's got his health. You know, he's really got his health. So I think you're finding that that's why I think our generation are trying to keep healthy. You know, my dad, honestly, you know, I'm a lovely, lovely man, but, you know, the amount of cheese he put you to eat each night and not do any exercise, you know, in one way, you can see why he got to where he got to. So I think you're absolutely right, David. But I'm not a doom and gloom merchant. I've learned to try and look at the positives in life, and I've really got a lovely anchor in my life. Which, you know, my oldest daughter's actually a doctor in an A&E department in Dorchester. So if I think I've had a bad day, I then phone her up and realise my day is absolutely brilliant compared to her. And I think that's what put me back in that real world. You know, you can get wrapped up in things that actually, in the big meaning of life, don't mean anything. You know, sitting here today doing this is fantastic. You know, I've got a mother alive at 96. I've got my in-law alive at 83. My mother-in-law alive at 83. I'm doing okay. But I think what you're going to see is this concept of retirement, like I said, disappears. It's just how you manage later life. And actually, I quite like the idea of doing 2 or 3 days a week, and maybe, because actually it's good, as long as you're enjoying it and adding value, why wouldn't you do it? And I think businesses, this is my plea for the older generation, a plug, is I think businesses like people that want a second job, not a second career. And I think that's really important. So they've done their bit of careering. They now just want to come to work and do a really good job. A couple of years ago, I saw that B&Q were actively recruiting over 55s. And there was this wonderful television program where they got some older people back to work. And I always remember this lovely lady went into the restaurant, and the restaurant owner was not happy until she finished her shift. And she thought the person was the best thing possible. She helped the youngsters, she was good, she was reliable. So I think there's a whole plethora of things that's got to come out of where we are, David. But I think, I can talk for England, so I've got to be careful. The key thing about this is planning. And we were talking about the other day, David. My brother keeps a boat down at Lymington, and when he goes out sailing on his boat, he knows where he's going, but the wind blows him off course. He has to tap back on course. That's about anything. I think this year, all of us have had a plan. We've just been blown off course. We've got to keep getting it back on course. And that's what, you know, I think is so important to do, is just keep it on course. And also, sometimes, do you know what? This is a very personal opinion now. I've got to be careful. 2 things that matter. Sometimes when you've got enough is enough. And also, any asset, the only thing you've got to worry about is what price you buy it at and what price you sell it at. In between is noise. I think we get wrapped up in the noise. It's a bit like a business. A business is only worth what somebody's prepared to pay for it. That's any commodity. I think sometimes, David, getting out at the right time is more important than maybe getting and I think we've seen that around a little bit at the minute. You know, some people have stayed in a little bit too long in a business, and I think when enough's enough, it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes people haven't really sort of sat down and looked at the figure, in terms of what the number that's going to make sense for them. And sometimes they think it's more than it actually is, in terms of what they actually need. So, and sometimes they're working on unnecessarily to try and achieve some dream sort of goal.
I always remember one story, and then we can open up for questions there, because I'm conscious we've been talking for a long time. I always remember one story. St James's Place sponsored the Barbary Horse Trials, which is not far from me, and I met this lovely gentleman. And I said, pleased to meet you, blah, blah, blah. And he said, oh, yes. Somebody similar to David said to me last year, he sat down with the figures and just said, why are you working? And he said, I didn't know. So I stopped working, and he's now retired. He's bought himself this amazing caravan, which he wanted to do. The last time I saw him, he towed the caravan down to Barbary because you could stay at the caravan place there. Last time I saw him, he really did enjoy our hospitality, if you understand what I mean. Quite a few bottles of wine, asleep on the bank. You're going, perhaps he's got it right. And I think that was a good lesson to me, learning about it. Great financial planning. Yeah, but that's cool. Right.
Ian, it's everybody's got sort of different views on where they want their retirement, what's really important to them. And I think obviously the final salary defined benefit sort of issue, it's a really big one. But I think, I mean, just give some idea of how St James's Place approached that for.
Well, I think first and foremost, if you've got one, well done. If you haven't got one, don't worry. So if you've got one, and our starting point is always to sit down with you and say to you, right, is it worth considering transfer? And we have a very robust process that takes you through, and will take sometimes between 3 and 6 months to get all the information to make sure that it's right for you and your family. Because one of the things I think this links into to me is what we are definitely seeing is my daughters are far more aware of my financial position than I ever was with my mum and dad. We talk to them about it, so I think what we do, then we talk to a client, we talk to them about their spouse or partner and their children, what they're trying to achieve. And I know David does this really well. One of the things that you don't say give advice on these type of things, one of the recommendations I strongly recommend to anybody is make sure you've got an up-to-date will. It's really, really relevant. And if you're getting a little bit older like me, and if you're really old like David, have a lasting power of attorney, because that's also really important, because at some point you might need it. So I think our process with, if you've got a defined benefit scheme or defined salary scheme, yes, you can look at it. It's got to be based very much on sitting down with you, asking some quite difficult questions to make sure it's right, David.
Yeah, it's sort of, we need to obviously understand the whole situation, different income streams, and obviously that capacity for loss, different aspects, which really, and longevity in the family, health. There's so many different questions around this, and obviously it's almost almost like a case to say yes. We're building a case to say yes, this is right to transfer against the regulator's recommendation. So, and in many cases we recommend against a transfer because it's not right for the individual, it's not right for their family, and so in many cases that is the end result of reviewing these sort of details with clients.
Absolutely right. Mm-hmm. I'm very conscious of time. We've been rabbiting for 50 minutes.
Yep.
Happy to answer, as long as you're okay, David, unless you've got any more questions that I wasn't aware you're going to ask me. No,
I think we've finished all those questions here. Thanks very much. Yeah, it's good to chat to you as always. Let's open it up to questions in the audience if there's any questions.
So I think Keith posted a question. Keith, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Yeah, that was really useful. I liked the bit about the 3 stages. It's because the bit about planning your retirement is how much money do you need at different stages. My father-in-law is the other person who hacks off the actuaries because he's been retired for 33 years on his 25-year pay into IBM.
Right.
And he's still in perfect health, so he's going to go on for another while. But he just can't spend it anymore. So he had a fairly even income from that final salary, which probably it served him very well. But if it had been skewed that he took some of it early and then didn't need as much now, it might have been better for him. So on that, is it therefore, if you look at planning these 3 stages, is it better taking your final salary early because you have some penalties, but you're able to spend it? Is it better taking a bigger lump sum if you're in one of the ones where you can skew the lump sum, so you've got that flexibility
Yeah.
in that first stage. Because frankly, if you live, I think your 3 stages are about right. Most of my friends' parents, if they've got to 85, they're just not spending anymore.
No.
And if they've managed to get to 85 and still spend, they were doing pretty well.
Oh no.
So how do you try and convert things to your advantage so you've got more money, more flexibility in what you called it the go-go years?
This is a very personal opinion.
Yeah.
Yes, because I think where I'm at is if you look at, I'm very clear that touch wood, I keep reasonably good health. I really, I go on holiday. I don't travel. It's a classic example. I'm one of those really boring people. This year is the first year in 15 years because of circumstances. I'm going to Dubai for my holiday because that's what I do. So we want to travel a lot, Keith. So we're going to take a higher level of income. So all my financial planning is to make sure I'm not ready to retire. But when my wife retires in 3 or 4 years' time, we will have quite a high level of income because I just want to enjoy it. And I think it's really interesting. Sometimes the best financial advice is the simplest. I was trying to explain this to my mum who doesn't get it. She doesn't really need any money. She's very lucky. Start giving it away because you can give money away out of income. Yeah. It's quite a tax efficient way of doing it. And I think it's easy to do, David. What I would be very careful of, if I've got a final salary scheme, I'd look at what the penalty is, and is it better to transfer that to take the whole fund away, because you might be able to mitigate that penalty, because you get a penalty on the income where they won't give you a penalty on the fund, and that might be a more tax efficient way of doing it. There's no questions, most of you would be aware that in any pension you get tax-free cash out of a pension. That's quite a nice little thing to have. And I saw somebody the other day, his tax-free cash, he's going to buy he's actually buying a caravan, because the next 5 or 10 years he actually wants to move around, towing a caravan. That's my idea of hell, if I'm really honest, but for him it's absolutely fantastic. I want to be quite honest there. Me towing a caravan isn't going to happen. My wife, unless you can plug in hair straighteners and there's an ensuite, isn't going to happen, if I'm really honest. How we've moved in 32 years is beyond me, but never mind. So I think, but what you're right about, Keith, I think people now, and I think this year's really helped, want to enjoy life. I think one thing that I've seen this year is we've spent more time with our children, either like this or actually when we could physically see them, than ever before. I've never spent so much time sitting in my garden in my life as I've done this year. So I think this idea of a higher level of income is really true. Nicole's mum and dad came round the other day. They don't spend any money. It's really, and it's genuinely quite sad, because we've also said, and I'm being deadly serious here, we don't want any money. We're okay, spend it. But they just, that generation, I call them the martyr generation, like I said, they cannot spend it. We're on holiday with my in-laws and my mother at a particular house we rented. They were all sitting on this chair telling me how much they were saving each month. You're going, why? We have something called a rainy day. It's absolutely chucking down. Just go and enjoy it, But they physically can't. And I get it. My mum was born in the 20s and all that. But I think you're right, Keith. Planning that is so important. And genuinely, do you know what? We do have a problem with people retiring, getting them to spend money. Because our job is to make sure you don't run out, but they get so worried about it that they don't spend money. We want them to spend money. Some of my other mates have really got it cracked, and they are really spending well, I have to say that.
Thanks.
No, I'd agree, Keith. It really is just trying to get the right level of income at the right time. And usually people want to spend their money when they're younger, healthier, and they want to do things. They're motivated to do things. So I mean, some of my clients, they've got relatives in Australia, their children are in Australia, for example, and they're traveling backwards and forwards from Scotland. So we look at their income levels and say, look, you could afford to go business class here. And sometimes it takes me 2 or 3 times to say to them, right, you could do this. I mean, they're quite conservative people, low profile, but they think, oh, that was such a good decision. I'm not going to go back, because they really enjoy the flight and enjoy going over, and it's not going to make a huge difference to their overall position. But it's just like Ian says, it's encouraging. Sometimes we're encouraging people to, say, come on, you need to spend some money here. But you're absolutely right. The balance is, you have to think to yourself, what's important to you and your family in terms of how you want to spend your time. Yeah. Once you retire, and in the good years when you're healthy, and sometimes we don't know how long our health's going to sort of last and all the rest of it. But generally speaking, we're not spending as much money when we get older because we're not traveling as much.
One of the things we've seen this year, one of the big trends we've seen is, and by the way, this is me being very lucky and quite privileged, I work for St James's Place. I haven't been furloughed. My income stayed the same. My wife's a school teacher. My other daughter's a school teacher. Mine's a doctor. We've seen no drop off in our income. I have never saved so much money as I have this year because we're not spending anything. I worked out and filled my car up 5 times this year. I usually fill it up once a week. So what we've seen is, if you're lucky enough to be working through this, actually, you've seen a lot more money being saved. And I don't know if you've noticed things like DFS have now announced how much more people are spending on sofas and stuff like that. In the office I'm sitting in, I had this built just after lockdown, the first lockdown. The build has never been busier. So it's really interesting to see that people who've been lucky enough like me working actually have been able to save more. And I think the other trend I've definitely seen is, which I really get, more people are holding more cash than ever before, just in case. And that's just in case of the family or the business. So we are definitely seeing, and I generally get that. I really do get that. You know, I can argue why you should put money in the market. Or, rubbish. Well, how do you feel? What you got on the horizon for the next year? And I'm sure all of you as businessmen and women, you know, I love the number of times I've been in strategic meetings. Can you do a SWOT analysis, a pest analysis? And what's the point? I think most people now are just doing a business plan for the next 6 months, because actually that's about as far as we can sort of see for the next 6 months. So I think it's interesting to watch, David.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor?
Great.
No. Can I just quickly ask, just because obviously we want this to be a reference point for our members looking back, is there any guidance you would give? I know it is around retirement planning, but for the under 40s, some of the key things that they should think about, please.
Yes. I think the thing they should think about is one day they won't be. And that sounds really weird. I think sometimes, I remember when I started work age 20, if anybody could say, oh, it goes very quickly. So I think anybody under 40, actually having a plan is as equally as important as somebody 50 or 60. And the great news is, the younger you are, in some ways, the objective becomes easier because you've got longer to save for it. I've met people, I remember one day, I met this lovely gentleman who's 59. I want to retire Ian, next year at 60. I'd like to retire on an income of £25,000 a year. Great. How big's your pension fund? £15,000. Yeah, okay. So I think what I'll say to the under 40s as much as ever is, 1, if you can plan, have a plan. 2, stick to it. And this is a very personal opinion. I think what we are definitely seeing with the next generation, I look at that generation, they're not as paranoid about us as moving house. You know, we've got a house, we make money, we get a bigger house. Actually, what they want is a nice house, and they're planning to stay in it and enjoy their life. Does it make? I think there's a real, again, a bit of a shift. Whereas all I ever did is buy a house. Okay, I did spend 9 years in negative equity. Buy the next one, make a bit, and I think the next generation aren't quite like that. So I think actually, if you're under 40, the sooner you can start, definitely the better it is. Absolutely right. And I think they are perhaps more receptive to that because of their parents. You know, if you look at my kids, they look at me because I've got a final salary scheme. Okay, they're part of the teachers. Getting them to realise that it's worthwhile actually joining the teacher scheme, it was quite an interesting debate. But I think most people won't have a final salary scheme, so they've got to really create their own wealth for their retirement. So starting early as you can, really important. So I think it is actually looking at that.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm conscious of time. We're 1 minute to 12 and I'll let people go to their next meetings. Thank you so much, David and Ian. That was really,
You're welcome.
really insightful.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
In a really interesting and funny way. I really enjoyed it. We will record it so we can share it with everyone. And I know it's quite a personal discussion for some people. So I'll share both David and Ian's details with everybody who registered, if that's okay. And thank you so much again for all those who participated and came on the call, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Trish, thanks very much. Thanks, Trish.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Stay safe.